All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. I am Sujan Jez. I'm the CEO of California Competes, and I'm excited to launch our webinar where we are going to explore the present landscape of online education in California and the possibilities that lie ahead. Before we move any further, a couple of housekeeping items. Should you have any questions during the session, simply click on the Q&A icon located at the control panel and submit your question through there. We will try and answer as many as we can during the webinar, and we will save those. And if your name is noted, we will follow up with you to answer some of those questions directly. And then we will also have time for a Q&A at the end of the webinar, and we will look for those questions that are best answered via discussion, via the panelists, and hold them for that point. And we will also send the recording to everyone who registered for the event, and we will also post it on our website, californiacompetes.org. So I'd love to begin by learning more about the folks who are joining us for this great discussion today. If California can harness the full capabilities of online ed, all stakeholders across the education to work continuum benefit. So I want to know, what sector or sectors do you represent? So take the poll that has popped up on your screen. Please take a moment and answer that poll question. And then question 2 is really about understanding your interests. So as you've seen, hopefully, or will see shortly in the publication we put out, we've identified 5 main areas critical to the success of online ed in our state. So we want to know, when it comes to driving progress and equity in online education, what area interests you the most? Take a second and do this poll. If you're selecting other on either one of these questions, please take a moment in the chat and let us know what the other is. Okay, I'm going to wrap up the poll in a couple seconds. All right. And now I'm sharing the results. So if you want to take a moment and look at it with me, we see most folks on this call today are coming from higher ed, about 81%, but also good representation from our policy community, workforce development, research. And then when it comes to driving progress and equity in online ed, the areas that folks on the webinar are most interested in are pretty diverse. Quality leading at 60%, followed closely by organizational, those structures that impact progress, data, culture, value, finance. Thank you all for doing that poll with us. So what are we going to do further in this agenda this day? Let me talk through our agenda. First, I'll share the current landscape of online ed in California and a little bit about who California Competes is. And then Laura Bernhardt, one of our senior researchers, will share about our new publication that just came out, share some highlights from this work, and we encourage you to dig into the work further. And then we'll go into a panel discussion. And I'm thrilled we've pulled together a panel of higher ed leaders who believe in the transformative potential of online ed, have led major online education efforts, and can speak candidly and frankly about what it was like and what it will take to move our state forward. I want to flag that we will have more to come around online education and how we move our state forward, including future events that spotlight some of the very amazing things faculty are doing in their classes in California. So this conversation is just the start. To be informed about what's coming up, please sign up on our website, californiacompetes.org, to be notified about those future activities. After the panel, we will have a Q&A with the panel. Laura and I are happy to join in if there's questions about the research at that point too. And then I will come back up to wrap things up. So some of you may not be familiar with California Competes. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit Higher Education Policy Research and Advocacy org, and we focus on solving the state's most pressing social and economic problems by conducting rigorous higher education and workforce policy research. We use that research to guide decision makers and policymakers in designing and implementing solutions that strengthen our economy and help our communities thrive. We view higher education as both a vaccine and an antidote against economic stagnation and social stratification for individual Californians, our communities, and the state's economy. And we believe long-term economic growth for California will be accomplished through shared prosperity. In doing this, we've identified 4 key issue areas. 1, effective and accessible online ed, which the work that we're going to talk about today fits into. We also focus on, and these issues are clearly cross-cutting, college access and success for adult learners. So making sure that our higher ed system works not just for high school seniors matriculating directly into high school or directly into college, but also the 27-year-old or 52-year-old Californian who realizes they need to access higher ed to get a better life for themselves. And for those high school seniors who go straight to college but don't complete and wish to complete at some later point. We also focus on aligning higher education workforce. And this is both about your serving our state's workforce needs and making sure that higher ed delivers effective programs of study that help drive that, but also really about making sure we have the workforce we need to deliver on our state's priorities, ranging from health and education to climate change, technology, and the list goes on. That drives down into things like ensuring that students have access to work-based learning opportunities, that we have accurate labor market information, both faculty and students, to make good decisions around what we're teaching and what students are learning. And last but not least, is coordinated policy setting and implementation. This is really about centering the Californian in our work versus centering the way that our institution and our states are structured. So the traditional one is around the transfer function from community colleges to university. How do we get those 2 entities to coordinate better? But also thinking more broadly around how do we better engage our state social services to support students into and through higher ed, but also how do we better connect higher ed and our workforce development system with its shared goals and priorities. So why are we so focused on online education? Today, students, especially those who face limited access to higher education, have expressed a growing demand for online courses. Our research found that 1 in 5 Californians plan to enroll in college in the next 2 years. That's 5.1 million Californians. And 3/4 of them said that they're looking for their courses to be exclusively on. That is 3.9 million Californians. Another survey, one that reached out to prospective community college students in our state, emphasizes the importance of access to online courses as a key motivator for enrollment. We also see higher education and policymakers responding to this demand, as evidenced by the UC and CSU compacts with the governor to double or triple their online course enrollment in the coming years. Yet despite the rising demand and use of online education, stakeholders have concerns that impact its progress. Examples include the UC Academic Senate's ban of fully online degrees, opposition to Calbright College, the state's online-only community college, and skepticism towards colleges enrolling students online in our state, such as ASU and Western Governors University. Given this current context of high demand and significant concern, California Competes jumped in. In today's declining enrollment adds another overlay to this conversation. We want to know in our work is how do we ensure Californians have access to high quality online educational offerings that improve educational opportunities and outcomes, which in turn fuels our state's economy and allows our communities to thrive. I'm thrilled now to turn it over to one of California Competes' senior researchers, Dr. Laura Bernhardt, who's leading a project that explores this very question and will share findings from our first publication on this critical question.
Awesome. Thank you, Sujin, and thank you everyone for being here. To better understand barriers to online education's progress, we explored the concerns that people have brought forth, seeking to understand why they exist and provide guidance to public post-secondary stakeholders on how to address the concerns and advance the state's movement toward a more equitable and agile system of learning. Today, we published our work in the form of a roadmap to advance change in this space. And we would like to acknowledge the Walter and Evelyn Haas Jr. Fund for supporting this work. And you can access the report on our website. I wanted to talk briefly about how we developed this roadmap because it's a little different from our traditional research projects. For this project, we leveraged semi-structured interviews and work group convenings and wrote the report in an iterative fashion. We knew that there were bright spots in our state's public higher education system, people doing innovative work in the online space and doing it, frankly, quite well. And so we wanted to hear and learn directly from them. We started by interviewing people who had won an award for their work in online education and used snowball sampling to identify other leaders in the field. We convened 13 individuals who are leading innovative practices in online education in all 3 segments for a multi-day retreat. These intensive conversations helped us develop the 5 main focus areas that we're going to present today, drawn from the areas of concern. And this served as a draft for our roadmap. Then we conducted in-depth interviews with 14 additional stakeholders to test and add to our framework, brought the work group back together again to finalize the roadmap, and that is what we present to you today. The 5 focus areas identified in our research are quality, data, organizational, finance, and culture and value. And for each area, we outlined the current state, the optimal future state, why there is a gap between the 2 states, what institutions can do to bridge this gap, the expected effects of bridging the gap, and how these effects can propel California to the optimal future state. As an example of what you can find in our roadmap, I selected one piece from the quality focus area. The current state is that stakeholders question the quality of online education, but we believe that the future state is one where the broad and successful deployment of quality online education, coupled with extensive opportunities for professional development and rigorous assessment, leads to the consistent delivery of high-quality online options. The gap exists because of confusion about what online education truly is, and hint, it's not what most of us experienced in 2020. Institutions can start to bridge the gap by elevating high-quality examples of online teaching, classes, and programs. The expected effect is that online education's potential is better understood. And this leads to stakeholders leveraging online education to respond to diverse student needs and widespread support for quality online education. Engaging in this work to identify the concerns about online education and how we can address the concerns led us to reimagine what online education in California can look like and rethink how our public post-secondary system can be more agile and equitable for all students. I encourage you to explore the report, and I hope you find it to be a useful framework for advancing change in this space. And now we're excited to dig into this topic with our esteemed panel. To help us unpack this exciting topic, I want to introduce our moderator for today's discussion. Eloy Ortiz Oakley is president and CEO of College Futures Foundation, a philanthropic and advocacy organization focused on improving post-secondary attainment for Californians of all backgrounds. Previously, Oakley served as chancellor of the California Community Colleges, where his work included the establishment of the California College Promise, the design and implementation of the Vision for Success, the elimination of standardized testing, the reform of remedial education, and the adoption of a student-centered funding formula. Oakley has also served on the University of California Board of Regents and as a senior advisor to U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona. Eloy, welcome.
All right, Laura, thank you. Thank you for that warm introduction. Good morning, everybody. It's great to have you all here. This is a very important topic that's certainly near and dear to my heart and the heart of the entire College Futures team. I first want to thank Sue Jin and the entire California Competes team for bringing this issue to our attention, for the report that Laura just covered, and for the conversation that we need to have around how to better serve learners of all backgrounds in the state of California. So as I begin to introduce the panel, this is, in my mind, exactly the kind of conversations we need to be fostering here in the state of California. Conversations that center the learner, and put at the heart of the conversation the aspirations and the deep desire of learners in California to have access to the economic mobility that they and their families deserve. And so this is what this conversation is all about. And it strikes me that here in the state of California, we are the birthplace of many education technology innovations, many companies who have gone on to serve learners from across the world, names like Coursera and Udacity and Calbright and Handshake and Advisorly, and the list goes on and on and on. These are all California technology innovators. Yet here in California, our traditional public and private colleges and universities have shied away from these innovations, have shied away from this technology. And I think this conversation really sets the stage to how we think differently about leveraging innovation in education to better serve Californians of all backgrounds, especially those who have been historically underserved. So with that backdrop, let me introduce our panelists, and we have some great panelists today. First, let me introduce Maria Anguiano. Maria is the Executive Vice President of Learning Enterprise at Arizona State University. ASU itself, is a pioneer at advancing universal access to opportunity for learners at every stage in life. She herself is a first-generation college graduate, and her early experience in the finance industry really helped her think about how to scale educational models to reach more learners. She's a former colleague of mine. She continues to serve on the University of California Board of Regents and also serves on the KIPP Foundation and the James Irvine Foundation boards. Our next panelist is Ajita Talwalkar-Menon. Ajita is the president and CEO of Calbright College, the first and only fully online California community college focused on skills-based credentials for adult learners. Prior to joining Calbright, she spent a little bit of time in the Obama administration, in the Department of Education, and as President Obama's higher education advisor. Of course, my favorite role for her was as a former senior advisor to the former chancellor of the California Community Colleges. Also joining us is Leroy Morishita. Leroy is currently the interim president at Cal State Los Angeles. And prior to that, he was president of Cal State East Bay, where he transformed that college campus and really made it a hub of innovation and economic development for the entire Bay Area. He also has a 40-year career in the California State University system. So we welcome Leroy back. And then finally, Catherine Newman. Catherine became the provost and executive vice president of academic affairs, the University of California in January of this year. She was also simultaneously appointed as the Chancellor's Distinguished Professor of Sociology and Public Policy at UC Berkeley. Before coming to the UC, Catherine was the University of Massachusetts System Chancellor for Academic Programs and the Senior Vice President for Economic Development. And that's where I got to meet Catherine. She played a critical role in merging what was then Brandman University with the University of Massachusetts to create UMass Global, a fully online college focused on adult learners. And yes, UMass Global is a California institution, if that confused you a little bit. So these panelists have a great depth of experience. And so let's jump into some of these questions and get the panelists on the spot here. So panelists, my first question is going to be for all of you. And I'd like to begin with Catherine. And we're going to talk about leveraging their experiences. So each of you brings unique experience to this discussion. Could you share how these experiences help shape the way that you think about and approach the way you leverage online education? So Catherine, let's start with you. Oh, and you're on mute, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Eloy, and thank you, colleagues, for this report and for including me in this conversation. I come to higher education with a keen understanding of how varied our student populations are. We have many working students in the University of California. We have students who have left us without degrees who need to come back and finish them. We have non-traditional students, and we have traditional students who, as they get closer to the real world, that is post-graduation, need more flexibility in order to begin their work lives while still completing their student lives. So appreciating that enormous variety has led me naturally to embrace remote education, whether asynchronous online or synchronous online, as a way of extending educational opportunity to all of these valued students. I do think we should understand that some of the skepticism that the report points to derives from the origins of much of online education in the for-profit sector. That doesn't mean that there are horrible things going on and they are permanently connected to online, but that origin point has been a bit of a barrier, I think, to crack through in providing a common sense of quality. The high debt levels in the for-profit sector, I'm afraid, tainted the enterprise in ways that are, prologue is not the future. There are many ways in which we can take this model and run with it in a high quality fashion. But I do think that's created barriers that we've had to crack through. And I've been working on that for much of my leadership career. But the University of California is poised to move ahead with a very high quality model in mind, addressing the needs of all of these various students who are in our midst.
Thank you, Catherine, and we look forward to the work that I know you'll be leading with your colleagues at UC. It's going to be very important work for the state of California. So, Leroy, let me turn to you next. You've spent a lot of time in the Cal State system. How has your experience shaped the way you think about online education at the institutions that you've led?
Thank you, Eloy. So I'm a first-gen college graduate also, grew up in a small town outside of Fresno, and the opportunity to go to college really transformed me, changed my life, changed my trajectory. Obviously got here, but it was really quite amazing. And when I grew up, most of my classmates in grammar school and high school were Mexican American, the term used then. And I felt that they were tracked and they were not always encouraged to go on to college. And so part of my drive has always been to provide greater access and to be involved in trying to get more students into college and have that opportunity that I had. And so working in the CSU all these years, it's really trying to look at the strengths, the successes of the CSU in terms of the 450,000 plus students we have and the diversity of the students, much like Catherine was talking about. Our students are very diverse in terms of their backgrounds, in terms of so many being the first into college to go to college, coming from a lower socioeconomic status and the financial needs, and really kind of all of these different things that are weighing in. So I view online education as another avenue, right? Face-to-face is very important. I believe strongly in that. But online education is another avenue for others to be reached, particularly if they're in remote areas, they have difficulty getting to the campuses. All of those things really stand in the way. So again, it's like, I think what Catherine was talking, I mean, online education can be very important, but it needs to be really a mindful process of really trying to figure out how do we provide a high quality learning experience for our students, really thinking intentionally about building an online infrastructure, and really that includes designers, technology support, creative thinkers, content experts, student services professionals, because we have to provide advising, financial aid, and counseling services to them as well. So I think the focus to me is not on access alone with online education, but also stressing that student success and completion.
Thank you, Leroy. And I can't help but remember that the CSU was one of the leaders in adopting online education back when San Jose State first began in the MOOC movement and really introducing California to online education. So let me turn to you, Ajita. You have been working in California for some time. You've been leading community colleges, first fully online education community college, and your views have been shaped by all the years you spent in federal government. How has all that experience shaped the way that you think about Calbright College?
Yeah, I actually think my connection to this work is personal in many ways, like Leroy's. I actually grew up as a student organizer, so I cut my teeth in Wisconsin doing that work on behalf of students, and I sort of have never left that orientation to it. So this understanding that all of the things that we do have an important and intimate obligation to the learners that we serve, and centering their voice in the process of designing learning experiences has been more of the mantra. So in my time in federal government, what we were experiencing then has only grown more urgent in terms of what we understood were the barriers to access that students were facing. And online education, and I hesitate to even call it that, was an opportunity to rethink the relationship with the learner, the engagement with the learner, the institution's role in designing things that were centering both their decision-making and their design efforts, the model itself, around the core needs of the learner. And I went to a school at a time when I think many of you remember this, where the provost stood up and used to turn to the left and turn to the right and tell you that both of those folks were not going to be in attendance come year 4 of your 4-year degree if you went that route like I did. And it was, when I look back on moments like that, which was not that long ago, it was always stunning to me to understand that in any other place that would be a big systemic failure, and here we found ourselves celebrating sometimes exclusion at the expense of accessibility. And when we fast forward the conversation, we look at things that were done by the federal government, done by this administration currently, a lot of it focused so much on providing better access points to information, better decision making, better incentives for colleges, better design of rules of the road, particularly with respect to the regulatory oversight that was really required to do innovation and do digital education in a responsible way. And so all of those experiences, but mostly the experiences I had myself as a student and with my colleagues in the institution who were under-resourced, who didn't have access and who often didn't make it through, those who are the experiences that I hold at the center of this work. And that is the culmination of the work that I've done to date is anchored in the way that I look at the opportunity for California, the opportunity for institutions like Calbright to really get down into the needs of the community and the needs of the learner.
All right, thank you, Ajita. It strikes me that if we were doing a webinar in the medical industry, saying that if you were a patient, look to your left and look to your right, and that the majority of you are not going to survive this day, probably wouldn't be a good tagline. So I'm not quite sure why it ever became a tagline in higher education. But let's turn to you, Maria, and I saved you for last because you come from an institution where your leader, your fearless leader, is always championing education technology. How has your experience shaped the way you think about your role and what you're trying to accomplish at ASU now?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank California Competes for inviting me into this conversation, and just really honored to be here with you, Eloy, and our esteemed colleagues. I'll start by saying that I think my experience actually also comes back to my experience as a first-generation college graduate. And, in where I grew up, which was 7 miles from the Mexican border in San Diego, maybe 50 of my classmates got to go to a 4-year institution, and of those, maybe 10 got to have a residential experience. And so even then, as an 18-year-old, I knew that there was something kind of systemically wrong with our system that excluded so many, right? I was one of the lucky ones. what about everyone else in my high school, everyone else in my community? And so, you know, yes, I'm at ASU, but I've also had a variety of lots of experiences in higher ed, including 14 years serving at the UC system, and also working at Minerva, which is actually a completely online educational institution. And now at ASU, I will say what I've learned throughout all those experiences is that education is not a one size fits all, right? And that's when I think about why was everyone excluded 20 years ago and many people continue to be excluded, is because we have kind of a rigid system in a one model. And what we're trying to figure out is how to create a model that fits everyone, inclusive by design. Some people might want face-to-face. Some people might want asynchronous content, which is, you know, not real time. Some folks do better when it's real time, like we're doing right now, right? There's 198 people that get to listen to us right now in real time, that if we were face-to-face, perhaps could not have been, it wouldn't have been accessible to them. And so really we think about at ASU about the educational experience as how do we include as many people as possible. And that means creating a whole variety of modalities versus saying it's just one way. When you have 150,000 students as we do, we have students experiencing education in every modality. And so that's what I'd like to see for the future.
All right. Well, keep your mic on, because this next question, I'm going to start with you, Maria, as well. You know, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic changed a lot of views in the way that we and learners think about post-secondary experience. I think in many ways, we're never going back to the years before the pandemic. And while certainly it was my experience in the community colleges that one day we were having arguments over whether we can or should go online. And of course, the next day we were all online. And of course, along the way, being on Zoom doesn't mean that you're online either. So there's a myriad of different experiences, quality experiences. So for you, Maria, how did the pandemic influence the way that your institution approached online learning, and what lessons did you gain from those years during the pandemic?
Thanks for that question, Eloy. And I'll say before the pandemic, ASU had 60,000 online students already. And so during the pandemic, it took us about a week because to get everyone online for the ones that we have about 70,000 students that were face-to-face and about 70,000 that were online. And so to get everyone online, it took us about a week because we already had that infrastructure in place, including, frankly, comprehensive training for faculty on how to teach online. But I'll say what it taught, I think it taught us a couple things. One, it taught us that human beings don't do well in isolation, right? And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, because a lot of folks have experiences with online education only through the pandemic. And so I would say a world in which you're not allowed, you have a social isolation, you're not allowed to talk to, you know, really see anyone, and you're doing online education is going to look very different than when you are in a engaged community, learning online, learning in person, learning flexibly. It's just a different experience. And so I'd say the learning is caution people not to inference too much from the pandemic experience. Two is that to do online education well actually requires a lot of resources, and it's not just Zoom, right? For example, ASU has a math spine that it's spent millions and millions of dollars on to take you from pre-algebra to calculus and all the courses in between in an adaptive way, which means it can track you from pre-calculus or pre-algebra to calculus. And if you, along the way, we can see, oh, you're missing a few components, we're able to quickly show you kind of the areas that you're missing. You can't do that in person, right? There's no way to personalize education at that level in person. And so there's in some areas, I would say, where we're going to see our digitally enhanced learning actually having much higher quality than our face-to-face for certain subjects. And so I think that's what it taught us, is we've got to invest in a very nuanced way, depending on topic, depending on the level, depending on, you know, the level of the student and the the type of academic subject. It's very different and very nuanced. And so I just want to stress that for everyone here that might be learning about online education. We cannot take a one-size-fits-all approach to it.
Oh, that's great insights. And I think, you know, I want to reemphasize the point that you made, which, you know, sometimes, particularly before the pandemic, people thought, well, online education could be a cheaper way of delivering education. I think it's sometimes the opposite. It requires quite a bit of investment, both in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of training and support of human capital to make sure that we reach students well. Ajita, let me ask you, your institution was growing up during the pandemic. So how did that influence the way you thought about leading Calbright, and what lessons did you learn as a result of going through that experience?
Yeah, I think, you know, the first piece is, of course, the pandemic really revealed in the transition to remote learning exactly where our fault lines were in the public higher education system and higher education in general. And that was with a population of learners that had been traditionally left behind, working learners, adults who were disconnected from economic opportunity and educational opportunities. And the pandemic exacerbated that, not because there wasn't remote access to content, but because something in the learning experience was still fundamentally incompatible with the lives they were leading, and now under this acute pressure. And so I think it really brought home this understanding that the needs of the learners that we're talking about, particularly in moments of inflection like this, have not previously been focused on in relationship to the way an institution has to galvanize everything that it offers in service of those students. And I think the biggest lesson I am thinking a lot about what you said, Maria, which is that in some ways, it not only is it not a one size fits all. You know, we talk about a transformation to remote education. We talk about online education. I don't think it's any or either of those things. This online education is a mode. It is not a model. And what we are understanding and experiencing is that we have to have new models, new approaches, new fully comprehensive approaches to serving different populations of learners. And that is as key. And so at Calbright, you know, we were fortunate with your leadership at the time in your role as chancellor and Governor Brown at the time to really be ahead of what we were already observing was a challenging set of realities facing adult learners and their ability to successfully engage with the community college system, and then also to matriculate through, more importantly. And the pandemic, I think, just brought that into clearer view. And for us, I think understanding that our students' experience was king was the major and the primary takeaway. And what that meant is you had to constantly be evolving as an institution in the way the infrastructure was set up, in the way that we were building what the college had the capability to do and deliver. That was a design opportunity. That was also an opportunity for us to really continue to learn more deeply the needs of our learners and to build processes and systems for responsive design that are carrying us forward today.
Catherine, let me turn to you, and I'm going to adjust the question a little bit for you, since you spent most of your time during the pandemic at the University of Massachusetts. While you were at the University of Massachusetts, particularly going through that experience of the pandemic, your institution also decided that it needed to enhance its ability to offer courses online, and thus you eventually merged with what was then Brennan University. How did the pandemic shape your thinking, and why did the University of Massachusetts feel it needed to acquire that kind of capacity?
So I would say it shaped my thinking in one really fundamental way. When we use the term selection effects, we're talking about the ways in which students and faculty both tended to sort into different modalities. The pandemic was the first time in which we didn't have any selection effects. everyone was remote, all students, all faculty, and for the first time, you could observe what's possible along the entire continuum of academic preparation and program availability. So for the first time, we had all of our faculty online, not just some, in a sort of separate unit, which is often the case for online instruction. And we had all of our students online as well, which is often also not the case. And so for the first time, we could see what it would mean for online education to serve the entire spectrum of both students and faculty. And some of the early research is telling us that many of the mythologies we have were completely inaccurate. For example, the Teachers College has now come out with a new study that shows student engagement in large lecture courses was far more enhanced by the online experience during the pandemic than their experience sitting in large classrooms, which are, quote, face-to-face, but they're sitting in the back of a 1,000-student auditorium. So we have a lot of myths in our heads about what constitutes engagement, what constitutes quality, and the pandemic gave us an opportunity to see, in a sense, what was true and what wasn't. But to Maria's point, it was also a very special and unfortunate context within which to do so. Don't ever try to get people's sense of what makes them happy or fulfilled during a pandemic. It doesn't come out all that well. Nonetheless, I think we learned a great deal about what was possible. So two things happened during my time at the University of Massachusetts. One I'm going to mention that you may not know about, Eloy, the other you do. So we took our remote education international for the first time. Through our affiliation with Shorelight, which is a company in the Boston area, we began developing a curriculum which was broadcast all over the world and enabled students who were bound for American universities and were stuck overseas to get started on their college curriculum with courses that were delivered live and synchronously, literally in dozens of countries. So that was one very interesting experience of enlarging the universe of students who could come into the University of Massachusetts. But the second, as you noted, was the creation of UMass Global. And that really came about from understanding that in Massachusetts in particular, but in the country as a whole, there's some 35 million and growing people who have some college but no degree. And that number was growing in Massachusetts as well, and no easy mechanism by which to complete those degrees. And we had employers banging on our doors, telling us they needed us to help supply a well-educated workforce that needed to include people who were adult learners. This is not news to the other people on this panel, but in Massachusetts, there was no mechanism for doing that. What we were looking for was a high-quality example of an adult learner-oriented enterprise. And we found it in Brandman University, which was paid far more attention to the resources needed to support that kind of education than any other entity we looked at for potential acquisition. Very keen investment in advising, in educational technology, in independent student individualized learning plans. Many of the other institutions we looked at, especially many of the for-profits, were less inclined to be that careful. And as a result, Brandman had extremely high and very admirable completion rates. Not shocking, since they put the resources in to make sure that that's what happened. And when the University of Massachusetts looked to acquire a more rapid capacity to meet that adult learner market, we wanted to be sure our partner was extremely high quality, that no one could look at it and say, that's a second-class education. And that's really what we found in Brandman. So I guess overall, I would say the experience of the pandemic, sad as it was for so many reasons across the country, was an eye-opener for the University of Massachusetts. I believe it was an eye-opener for the University of California too, and it all will evolve in time, I think, towards similar kinds of very high-quality excursions into online education.
All right, thank you, Catherine. And I do want to save a little bit of time for questions from our viewers. But before we do that, let me ask you, Leroy, a question before we turn to those to the viewer questions. You've spent a lot of time in the CSU. You saw what happened during the pandemic, and the CSU has sometimes struggled with how to think about online education. What are some of the lessons that you've taken from this experience, and how should we be thinking about online education going forward?
I think one of the big things, obviously, it was a major disruptor for the academy. We had never experienced anything like this. Nobody has. And but I think one of the lessons that we really learned was, as was said earlier, one size does not fit all. Our student population really struggled, right? As a lot of student populations did, particularly the ones coming from living at home with their families. They didn't have a place to go set up their computer. We gave them laptops, we gave them hotspots, we gave them all the technology available, but they didn't have a private room. And then their parents would expect them to watch Junior and, you know, their younger siblings. And so it became very difficult for a lot of those students. So I think one of the lessons we learned is you have to provide spaces, right? And everybody's going to learn differently, and different modalities will work for different people in different situations. So for a lot of our students, they struggled with that part of it. Not so much trying to do the work, but finding a place to do the work and be in the classroom. And so that was really something that we really learned. The other part was, it was referred to earlier, we were doing remote teaching, right? We got all of our faculty going, but it was really just trying to teach what they did in the classroom on a Zoom. And that's not really online learning and online teaching, which I think my colleagues all agree with. It's very different. It has to be very intentional. It has to be put together in a very solid way, and affecting and knowing who your learners are and how do you reach them as best you possibly can. So I think, you know, what we've learned is that online is valuable. And I'll take something that Gavin Newsom told me, governor has told me years ago. At Cal State East Bay, in the last century, we created the first online program. It was a master's in online teaching and learning. And that was the first program that came forward. Now the CSU has over 150 bachelor's and baccalaureate programs. They have 140 credential programs, online programs, and 2 doctoral programs online, totally online. So we're moving in the right direction, slowly but surely, but I think this is the side benefit of COVID.
Thank you, Leroy. Now I'm going to toss some questions out from our viewers. I think we've got some interesting questions. So I'm going to toss the first one to you, Maria. So prepare yourself. So this question is about AI, and there's been quite a lot of interesting discussions in education technology spaces about the use of generative AI and other large language models to support the learning. In your view, how will the current AI gold rush permeating education affect online learning?
I was reminded this morning that to get to 100 million people, electricity took 70 years. ChatGPT took 2 months, same population. So just one note on the quick adoption of this technology on pretty much everything. It's kind of the new electricity, I would say. And so as I think about AI in education, I think it's not just going to affect online education. I think it will affect all types of education, including face-to-face education, and the hybridization of what's possible, I think, in all types of learning. For us at ASU, we're using AI very concretely right now to create personalized tutors, right, that can provide extra context to students that may be struggling with something in a course, advising, all sorts of extra services that would not be possible, because of resources available that can be added to the student experience. So I see it as an enabler to better teaching for sure. But I think we're very, very early on. I don't think we even realize yet what the true impact of AI will be in education.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. I just had a conversation with Jeff Calder from Coursera, and that was exactly the point. It's moving so fast. We don't even realize just how much of an impact it's going to have on all of us and all of learning. Catherine, let me ask you another question from one of our viewers. What types of academic and student support services do you think that our online students need to thrive?
Yeah, as we set up more and more online programs, especially if we end up with fully online programs, we're going to have to recreate a kind of whole ecosystem, I think, for this enterprise. And that's going to need to involve academic advising, It's going to need to involve engagement with faculty through office hours. It's going to need to involve student health or telehealth, digital library access. You know, we probably won't be able to provide swimming pools and running tracks, but pretty much everything else I think is going to have to be reconfigured so that it's available to our students who are at a distance. I've been doing a lot of thinking about what it will mean for UC students to go fully online, and those services are a really important element of the educational package we provide. So we want to be sure that students who are principally online feel comfortable coming to a campus, but that they have access to all of these key services when they're not physically with us. And that's going to be a whole building enterprise. But we began that during the pandemic. So we learned what we could do then. And increasingly, the whole world is depending on telehealth, for example. I think that got a huge injection for the country as a whole, and we've learned how valuable it can be, both for physical and mental health.
Thank you. Tita, let me bring you into one of these conversations that I'm viewing in the chat. So your institution serves a population that is not even represented in any of these other institutions. You know, working adults, working parents, struggling at the lowest levels of employment in our state. How are you thinking about the kinds of student services that your learners need in order to not only survive, but to thrive?
Yeah, there's definitely something specific to this community of learners that I'll highlight, and then something that I think can be also generalized to how we're thinking about it in the context of higher education more broadly. I think, to begin with, what we understood based on, deep understanding that we were developing with our learners that we had in the institution was that it was not enough to be online. It also has to be flexibly paced, right? So when we talk about designing around student learner needs, that's not our perception or perspective on what those learner needs are, but it's absolutely what we gain, the data and the understanding that comes from their learners themselves. It can't just be flexibly paced, but it had to connect to a priority and a value that they had, which was to be employable. So to actually have a skills-based approach. And it had to be something that was statewide and scalable. So I kind of highlight that as the backdrop of how we were thinking about approaching our learners. But the second thing is that it's not a field of dreams scenario. Fundamentally, when we think about creating the conditions of success for the learner community that we serve, it is very much about being able to facilitate in the learning experience itself, not if you build it, they will come field of dreams scenario, but more so a scenario in which there were aspects of belonging and community built into the learning journey itself. There was an understanding of the way that counselors and frontline student support specialists engage with our learners to develop an understanding of an anticipation of what their needs might be and how we connect them to those resources and services. And so it is really rethinking the relationship of the institution with the learner, and it is constantly checking back with and developing an ongoing capacity to more dynamically respond as those needs evolve or change. And then I can't emphasize this enough. Despite a lot of bright spots that we have here on this call and a lot of things that we've seen, it's still a pretty fractional representation of what is happening more broadly in higher education. So to get to that next phase of things, we also have to consider what are the enabling conditions in the structures that we have that can be created, or what are the barriers and how do we begin to dismantle those? So flexibly paced, asynchronous learning, all of these things we know to be effective if well implemented, but there are real barriers to doing so, to having a support forward model that we see increasing success in terms of our learners' ability to matriculate. But that is kind of structurally a difficult thing to manage, especially in existing systems. So I'll close out there, but I do I think the other piece of it is really being able to stay on top of. When I say understanding of what the learner needs are, it is really observable in the data, in the engagement with the learner, and the deployment of digital technologies, whether they're AI fueled or whether they are human powered, leveraging technology. Those fundamentally have to be tested before they can be generalized and deployed. And I don't think we have necessarily a habit of that in higher education as they do in other places and in other industries where they're trying to cultivate a relationship with a learner.
All right. I'm going to save the last question from our viewers for the person who is probably going to go back into retirement after he finishes his current interim status. So you have nothing to lose with your answer, Leroy. So this one I'm going to toss to you. So there has been a lot of stigma around online education, particularly in California. In many places, there's been a lot of pushback from faculty labor, from faculty senates, from even some more traditional college and university administrators. How do we get around that stigma, and how do we begin to view online education as an asset for learners going forward and as an asset for our colleges and universities?
I think we have to look at the definition of what is online education and really have that wholesome discussion about what is it, how do we define it, what do we need, what do we want the student to learn, and how do they go about learning? And we have to have that conversation at all levels, right? Because administrators from the top are the ones that can help to push things, but it's the faculty and it's the staff who have to engage and bring it up. So I think that discussion has to be very, very open and transparent, and it has to be a real conversation that we all have about what is going to be the way that we are going to best educate our students going forward. What are their needs? And as we talked about all these different modalities, yes, some are going to learn better. Maybe GE courses in the lower division are better face-to-face because then you get greater interaction, you get debate going on and discussion. But then other courses in upper division, master's degrees, some of them are going to still need to be face-to-face, but others could be online or hybrid. But we have to have that open discussion in this way about what's going to be best to provide an equitable, accessible education for as many Californians as we possibly can. And I go along with Ajita in terms of the structures we have set up. They are barriers. They are barriers for movement. We try to build pathways from the community colleges to the CSU and to the UCs. We try to do the ADTs, but those hold up things, right? And it makes it difficult. So I think we have to really put it out there on the table, Eloy, in a very wholesome way and say, we've got to talk about this. Yes, it is costly to go online and do things online, but we need to make sure that we do a good job in terms of setting things up so that our students really benefit from it and find out, meet the students where they are. I think that's the big takeaway here. And then whatever we build, let's build it so it succeeds. They're able to graduate, they're able to go on to the careers and add to the workforce as the state of California so desperately needs.
All right, thank you, Leroy. And I really appreciate you bringing in the word equity into this conversation, because I think this is what it's all about. It's about reaching learners from all backgrounds, all experiences, and giving them the opportunity that they deserve for upward mobility here in the state of California. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining us here on this panel. Really appreciate your insights, and I will turn it back over to Sujin.
Thank you, Eloy. Thank you for joining us to moderate. Thank you to our panelists for sharing your insights and experiences. I know this is not, a dog and pony show where you just get to come and showcase the great work that you're leading. And we had some really tough, good questions. I am feeling really hopeful. I feel like what came out so clearly is this being agile to addressing students' needs, and the Californians who aren't yet students but would be if we could figure out a better way to serve them. There's a lot to be known, and I think the questions that were coming through via the Q&A, which I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, and I am thrilled to see what the questions were, because I'm thrilled to see that we're moving past is online ed good or bad, but really around how do we deliver this in a way that best serves Californians and our students. And so I'm happy to say again that this is the beginning of the conversation that California Competes will be leading. Please dive into the report on our website. We would love to hear feedback. And if you're interested in digging into this more with us, with California Competes, please reach out. We have a great brain trust, and these insights are really driven by the folks in California doing the really hard work around this. So with that, I'm happy to say have everyone a great lunch, and I will hopefully see everyone again soon as we continue the conversations around online ed in our state. Thank you.